It's been a little while since I've done a video like this showing you the ancient Egyptians and what reality shows whenever you just simply look up pictures on it. But I'd like to do a little bit of a comprehensive overview here on the concept and show you things like this slide here, which shows something that they're starting to be able to let out, and no one is really going to turn around and try to pander or try to act ambiguous anymore. Has DNA been done on Egyptian mummies? Yes. Now, a team of ancient Egyptian DNA specialists has successfully sequenced genomes from 90 ancient Egyptian mummies, and the game-changing results give scientists their first insight of the genetics of ordinary ancient Egyptians, which changed surprisingly little through the centuries of conquest. Now, in this paper here, they also mention the fact that the current Egyptians have very little of a match. Some even said 1% to the ancient Egyptians, and the reason that there was given here in the paper is that sub-Saharan admix shows up along with Arab admix from the Islamic slave trade eras and later, of course, which they're still in Egypt at this point. And it shows that it showed up in post-Roman times. So this would be definitely after the fact of people there having some type of admix that you would think of as being sub-Saharan, and it wasn't there in the ancients. And the paper went on to say that the closest match to the ancient Egyptians were ancient Near Easterners like Levantines and Anatolian people. And it also says the closest match to the ancient Egyptians in modern times is modern Western Europeans. Now that makes perfect sense if you've been looking into this here, where they found King Tut's DNA, which was finally released despite what Zahi Hawass wanted to show, that King Tut's haplogroup, and of course Akhenatans and the people that led into his dynasties, were haplogroup R1b, which actually matches half of Western Europeans and is even higher in Spain and France, and up to 90% in ancient Ireland and current Ireland, by the way. And so that shows you something that a lot of people don't want to talk about. But let's look into this a little bit deeper, and I'm going to try to show you a congruity all the way through, but also of the earliest of dynasties, because Afrocentrics and others try to act like, well, it changed over time, whenever the genetics is said that it surprisingly didn't change over time. So, looking at this picture here, these are blue-eyed statues, or statuettes, if you will, from the pre-dynastic times, from before Egypt had even formed and everything, and they show a blue-eyed situation on these people. Now, blue-eyed people are all supposed to come from the Caucasus region some 10,000 BC and led into the people who were early agriculturists, and those people, it has been said in papers long ago, and Egyptologists have and even has shown it in older videos, where they brought into Egypt domesticated animals such as goats and sheep and things, and of course cattle, which were never endemic to North Africa nor Egypt, of course, along with a suite of grains that they used to make bread and things with, and that all seemed to show up around 7,000 BC. So this is something that happened well into the pre-dynastic times. There's also, I'd like to mention here, a Sumerian component which shows up in ancient Egypt just before they came together as one. And you can find this with certain artifacts, especially like the Geb el-Iraq knife, which shows you a Sumerian iconography of the master of beasts holding two lions apart, but also showing you a Sumerian type of people that are on this knife. And that shows it too, along with other things like ideographic writing, which they both started from, cuneiform, winged sun discs, all kinds of things that show it. And whenever I first tried to show these things to you, I actually, in an older video now, must be 7 years ago, showed you where they have this little paragraph written on Egyptian genetics, and they have a little paragraph there mentioning there was a Sumerian connection to the earliest Egyptians. And then later I did another video showing that, oh, now they have a lot more than a paragraph here going on. And then I did another later video showing you that they've got their own page now because it's quite extensive and shows you a lot of things, along with early mastabas, which both seem to use for burials, niched architecture, which is shown in both, and so on like that, and showing you a bunch of connections that are there too. But that's neither here nor there. That's actually part of what started them off. But these were pre-dynastic Egyptians, but if we look at the earliest dynasties, Khufu, Cheops, whichever way you want to go with it, the earliest pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, show that his granddaughter is shown with red hair even on the tomb walls for all to see for all time. And sure, it's become aged and over time and everything, but it's a neat effect where they actually used red lines on a blonde hair, and if you look up close to it, you're like, what is this? But when you get far enough away, it blends in and gives you that strawberry blonde appearance. So one could say redheads were there at the earliest of times and so on. But of course there's ginger, the pre-dynastic Gibelline mummy, which shows that it has a strawberry blonde type of hair. And this was before Egypt even formed. And it's not from the natron process in any way, because he's a naturally sand desiccated mummy. So it shows you that there were blonde haired people and redheads in the earliest of Egyptian times. In fact, pre-dynastic, before it even became Egypt, or Kemet, whatever you want to say, which of course Kemet has to do with the black alluvial soil of the Nile that was distributed out every year during the floods and enabled them to do advanced agriculture with, which of course shows you connections to agriculturists, again from the early Near Eastern period. And from looking into it, I found a bunch of connections, and I did older videos on it. But now that we have genetics showing that, it's crazy. But my genetic haplogroup shows up in ancient Anatolia and the Levant in ancient times. And there's even people who have made the connections. Well, this all has to do with people that were from the Caucasus Mountain area, which is, by the way, where Noah landed his ark at, right there on Mount Ararat, or what the Sumerians called Arata, and that connection is still there. And I just have to mention here, if we ever find a boat that's up in those mountains, or something that looks like a boat or could have possibly been that at one time, that's going to hook up to Utnapishtim, which is a story of the Sumerians that they had it quite a bit before it was ever brought into the Bible, and the concept that there was some worldwide flood. And that seems to go back to the Younger Dryas events where the earth was flooded. And it even mentions in the Bible how rain is coming on the earth, but the water came from below and so on too. Well, that's what happened at the end of the Younger Dryas, where the ocean, due to all the melting that happened, apparently from a fragmentary comet that hit the earth in the North American continental ice shelf and all the way into the Near East at certain sites that they show there, it caused such a rapid melting it caused pulse 1b, which actually flooded the earth in a short amount of time. And we have no way of discerning if it was in a year and a half or in a couple of weeks, but it actually shows a rapid melting of all this water and this frozen pulse that happened there. And if you look at the Younger Dryas, it shows you there was this warming trend coming out of the last ice age, and then all of a sudden a balling aeroid, which is a warming trend that happened because something happening which looked to be extraterrestrial in nature, such as a comet, an airburst that happened and so on. But then all of a sudden it drives back into a ice age condition, as cold, if not a little colder than it even was before coming out of the last ice age, and then goes back up fairly rapidly and meets where it was supposed to be, going in a linear fashion, warming up to our current temperature today. And so this spike that's there, people have made comments about, and of course that's why we don't have any of the North American creatures and all the mammoths and camels that were in North America, and North American lions, short-faced bears, all kinds of marsupials, things like that, giant sloths, and so on. In fact, I guess I'm going to mention here that whenever they found this, and of course it's always been under this idea of Clovis first, that got destroyed years ago, but they tried to destroy the careers of the people showing this rather than looking into the possibilities of it, because they already had a narrative they wanted to show versus the reality of what it was really showing. But in that process, the white sands showed these footprints that were there, and this lady that was carrying a kid and stuff. And whenever I heard about this, it just reminded me of the cartoon movie or animated movie, The Ice Age, because in that same area they find mammoths and mammoth footprints going right through there, a saber-toothed cat going right through there, a primordial sloth, which back then was a giant sloth, and so on too. And hold on, that's the main characters in that Ice Age movie that was there. So that's crazy. But anyhow, let's get back on point here, showing you these things of the earliest dynasties, because Din is one of the pharaohs of the first dynasty, and they've got a Ka statue of him that was made out of sycamore wood, apparently, or yew wood, both of which are sacred to the ancient Egyptians and a lot of other people. And yew wood was also the thing that was said to have hooked up to the ancient elves of ancient time and all of that stuff too. So there's a lot of mythology built all around that. Caucasians have a lot of mythology that's built around trees, plants, all kinds of things. But in that process, this picture I'm showing you now is Din with these crystal blue eyes. And when I first found out about this, I said, this is remarkable, because the eyes seem to follow you around the room, and whenever you get head on to it, it has this blue glow on it. And they used the white part of the eye out of certain kind of marble that they found that had little pink vein lines in it. And so they've used rock that tries to make it look like real person's eyes and so on, and it's pretty incredible. But one of the reasons I'm doing this video is because in one of my ancient videos, a guy jumped in and it said, well, blue-eyed people didn't show up till after the Hittites and stuff, and da-da-da. And I'm like, well, you're looking at ones that predate that in this video here, so what do you have to say about that? Hey, just look up blue-eyed Egyptian statues and you'll see it really predates the time of the Hittites, which you're trying to talk about. In fact, it goes into pre-dynastic times, which I'm showing right here. So you're trying to say you don't believe it, or you want to believe in what somebody else said instead of even looking into it. And in fact, somebody's showing you the truth and reality of it right here in this video, and you're acting like that's not happening. And then Egyptologist 7 just did a recent video, which is just a small short in a clip of an Afrocentric mentioning the fact that ancient Near Easterners had come into Egypt well into the pre-dynastic and stuff, and she's like, aha, sometimes they mess up and they say the exact truth of what people have known. But down in the comments, I had a couple people refer to me and stuff there, and so I made a comment on that and a few other things, and then all of a sudden I noticed this other guy saying almost word for word this same thing about the Hittites, and that's whenever blue eyes showed up. And it's like, what? So here I'm showing you where not only that, but blonde, natural redheads have been shown to be in ancient Egypt from pre-dynastic times all the way through. And it doesn't go with any change, just like the genetic paper I showed you the information on, until post-Roman times. And it's something that you hardly see in Egypt today, but you can still find it. In fact, in one of my older videos showing this same exact thing, a guy mentions that he didn't like the fact that they're saying the current population only has about a 1% match to the ancients, because of Islamic slave trade and introduction of sub-Saharan admix that was never there in the past. And so he was griping at me because he's an Egyptian that had blonde hair when he's a kid and kind of turned brown. He's got 3 brown haired people in his family and an aunt that has blonde hair and this, that, and the other. And I go, well, you can just consider yourself one of those 1%, and it's mainly in the Coptics. I'm only guessing that you're Coptic, but that's the truth and reality that's being shown here. And of course, Sayawas has said multiple times that the ancient Egyptians are the modern Egyptians, and whenever you look in genetics and everything, whenever they trace it down, they say, well, not quite so much, Sahi, but you're trying to give the people living there now some type of thing to stand on where they feel great about it. But there are things that happened in post-Roman periods that changed everything into what it is now. And while they are based on the ancient Egyptians that were there in ancient times, there are things that have changed in post-Roman periods due to Islamic slave trade of the Sahara and so on like that, and admix introduced basically, it seems, due to Arabics having admix and them mixing into the population, giving this sub-Saharan admix, which I think they pointed out as being an average of 8%, and Saharan admix being 16%, which is about double of that of Arabs. And so that was never there in the past, and they wanted to point that out. And I guess modern Egyptians don't like that. But in reality, there's just a little thing that's happening to the normal population there, and that shows no longer a connection to the ancient Egyptians, and shows you actually where the truth and reality of it is that there were a lot of Caucasians, apparently from the Caucasus Mountain region, that were all in ancient Egypt with natural blue eyes and natural blonde and red hair that's really not there anymore. And there was these waves of admix that came in post-Roman times. So this is after the end of the Egyptian dynasties, and things were basically all over. And they want to show you that this is not matching what was going on in ancient times. And so there's a little bit of a difference. I'm going to interject a picture right now, and I'm kind of going off a little bit, but right now there's a picture there showing some Nubians coming to give praise and money and all kinds of artifacts and things to Ramses, shown in his tomb. And everybody tries to talk about this in a lot of ways and say different things about it. But you notice that the chariot driver there is actually being driven by a white Apis bull type of cow, and he's a redhead. And then right in front of the cow, holding it back and stopping them as the Nubians showed up and everything, as a blonde-haired person. And if you've watched any of my older videos, you've seen me go through different tomb paintings too, because I had a guy that showed 273 or something like that, I can't remember the exact number, of tombs that show you there's blondes and redheads on ancient tombs. Now, of course, these tombs weren't really supposed to be ever seen again. Once they were sealed, they were sealed. But in that fact, it shows you a lot of things that are different from the reality of what you're led to think today as to modern times. But I recently did a short showing you the earliest depiction of the Sphinx, and showing you it had a different head and not what we think of as Egyptians with a Nemes headdress and so on, but about a correct positioned head. And this is the way that it looked in pre-dynastic times. And then in that same picture that's there, it shows you a clip out of what's on the Narmer palette, and that it looks just like that depiction also that was there. And most people have realized, and a lot of people agree, that it got recarved at one time. And of course they try to say, was it Anubis, was it a Leo the lion type of thing? But sphinxes can also be found in ancient Greeks and other people too, so it makes connections to a mythology that went on from way back when. But that's neither here nor there. Now, one step aside before I show you more blue-eyed Egyptians, is that King Tutankhamun's DNA haplogroup is R1b and his mitochondrial DNA, or female DNA, that was part of that is haplogroup K. Now, Y haplogroup K is inherited from R1b from his father and grandfather and so on. And most people realize that these dynasties of the Egyptians passed on to father to son, and so on like that. But in doing so, they show you that this whole ream was done that there. And so that makes sense when they say that the ancient Egyptians' closest match in ancient times, or in modern times, is Western Europeans, because R1b is matching that. In fact, it goes on to say King Tut's DNA haplogroup is shared by more than half of Western Europe, 70% of Spanish men, 60% of French, but they do not mention that up to 90% in Ireland, by the way. But however, it's rare in modern day Egypt, likely due to European immigration over the past 2,000 years. And they don't mention the fact that the genetics have come out and said one other big factor is Arabic influx from there, and they contained sub-Saharan admix, about 8%, and that changed things too over the last 2,000 years. Researchers believe that King Tut and Europeans share a common ancestor who lived in the Caucasus region about 9,500 years ago, and the R1b1A2, if you want to get specific, DNA haplogroup is thought to spread to Europe with the advent of agriculture at about 7,000 BC, and that makes connections to what I said before, because that's whenever they find that these different types of grains and domesticated animals were pulled into Egypt way, way before it ever started to formulate together, and where that actually comes from. So we have that, and I've showed you the pre-dynastic ones, but are there natural blondes and things like that in ancient Egypt? Yes, there are. In fact, if you just go to Wiki and look up hair and go down to curly, it'll show you a couple of people with curly hair, but they show you this scalp with the hair still onto it that's a natural blonde hair that looks all curly, like Farrah Fawcett from Charlie's Angels back in the day, or any other lady with curlish blonde hair. And that's what they're talking about, is curly. They're not talking about something that's some 4C type of hair, of course. And it says it's a scalp, which is from a mummy there that had a long black wig over their hair. So regardless of what depictions they're shown in the thing that it says, well, most of the Egyptian depictions are darker haired. Yeah, well, that's not necessarily what color the natural people were. They used to shave their head or keep it up real close, because with cattle and agriculture they had lice and things like that happen, so they kept it up low. But then also it became very vogue for them to wear dark-haired wigs, and people to this day do wear wigs like that, but a lot of people will get blonde hair or red hair and so on, and I'm showing you a picture of that right now. But let's go back to the ancient Egyptians. I've shown you the first dynasty and Den, which you can find in all archaeology, and Khufu's granddaughter showing as a redhead. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but both parents have to have the redheaded genes for them to have a redheaded kid. And that's why you notice sometimes these people where you don't see any redheads in their family, but they have a red-headed kid, and then the guy's like, you're looking at the milkman or the postal guy or whatever else and saying these things about them. Well, they both can carry a red-headed gene and have a red-headed kid whenever neither of them have red hair. But if they looked back in their family line, just a few granddad, great-granddad about it, oh yeah, this one used to be a redhead. And the other one in the other side, or maternal DNA, would also carry a red-headed gene, which doesn't necessarily always pop up. And of course, if both of them don't have it, it doesn't pop up. Well, whenever it does, it does. And here's a depiction of Nofret, and she has a husband, Rahotep II, and this is where they've taken and said, well, this is a statue, what can you in AI say that she would really look like? And here's the picture on the left of what she really looks like. And of course, I've had Afrocentrics say, "Oh, that's a fake statue," and it's like, the only thing fake here is your claims on ancient Egypt. You don't like the reality of it. In fact, E7 and I myself have shown pictures before where they clip out the light or pale women out of the depiction and want to show red ochre. And what they don't realize is that we all do realize red ochre is not black. In fact, the only black people that knew that Egypt existed were the Nubians, and they draw them as a darker people with bulbous foreheads and prognathism, and you can easily discern the difference between the two. But that's neither here nor there. The depictions that I'm showing you here is from the earliest dynasties, where it's showing blue-eyed and crystal blue-eyed statues. Now, there are blondes too and redheads. In fact, some of the ancient Egyptians were natural blondes, including queens like Bernice and Nitocris. Queen Hephaestus is depicted with yellow hair in a burial chamber at Giza. Red hair is considered a godly trait in ancient Egypt and was both feared and respected. For example, Pharaoh's Ramses II or Ramses the Great was often depicted as a deity in drawings, and it's unclear if his red hair helped him become a leader. But with all their mythologies they have along with it, and of course Set is known to have been a redhead, and there are a lot of depictions of him, even though they're showing him in an animism type where, of course, Horus has got a falcon's head dress on and so on like that. This is the connections that are shown to that. But all of these blue-eyed statues. Now, one thing that's quite often shown by Afrocentrics is this this bust that's done of Queen Ty. Well, we have Queen Ty's mummy, and she has auburn-colored hair, and she's pale and a Caucasian phenotype. But do they ever look up the other pictures of Queen Ty that's over all the tombs and things like that? Because she's shown as a very pale Caucasian woman. But they want to show that. And whenever they look it up, they see that, but of course they don't want to show that. They want to keep showing you this and trying to say it's a afro hairdo or something. Whenever scientists have already looked at this thing, and that's a silver veil over her head, and she's wearing a headdress on her head. And in fact, that headdress used to be covered with little lapis lazuli beads, blue beads, and some of them are still on there to this day. But they don't want to mention that. They want to keep saying that she's black or whatever off of it, and when the reality is that she's not. In fact, some people try to say, well, the Egyptians married into other people, like that guy tried to say with the ancient Hittites and so on, but genetics doesn't show that that happened. In fact, there are people with a similar haplogroups in genetics, but those were there at over 7,000 BC and earlier. Right? So that's showing you that people that made up ancient Egyptians. And there's been depictions made recently of once they find out the genetics and everything, and then look at his facial structure with these people that forensically can make facial structures and things and what they would look like. Here's a picture of Akhenaten. And of course you see this Amarna period and elongated heads and weird forms and everything. That's not reality. That's a depiction. Just like as we go through the Egyptian dynasties, once we get to about the New Kingdom, they're always making everybody look in a godly way as opposed to what they really look like. I mean, if you look at the statues they have of Ramses, even though he absconded a lot of people's other things and put his mark upon it and put his name upon it in his cartouche, but those are all done in a perfect and symmetrical way and things like that. And a lot of people realize, if you take a picture of yourself and cut it in half right at the nose and look at it and flip it left and right, you don't look like yourself anymore, because that's a perfectness. And they did that with Ramses. And you see what Ramses really looked like, and the fact that he had red hair, and he's been triple confirmed by genetics to be a pale leucoderm with red hair, much like the ancient Berbers of North Africa that all had in. And I've done a few videos of that showing you North Africa and showing that it's still going on to this day. But there's been recent admix, much more in modern time, of sub-Saharans there because of the trans-Saharan slave trade that happened. And people tried to say, oh yeah, well, that's during the Barbary coasts and whenever they did this and they did that. And it's like, no, because that goes way back before any of that happened. And in fact, goes back into primordial times. And there were Caucasians that, not all, of course, but some had natural blonde and red hair there and blue eyes and so on too. And you can see it in the Amazigh population. So that's another showing that's there. And if you look at these other pictures, I'll show you here. There's my Etri. He's an Egyptian scribe. In fact, if you look up Egyptian scribes and they show you the earliest dynasties, you'll see a lot of them with these crystal blue eyes here. In fact, one of them is stated to be Zahiawas's favorite statue. And if you look at it, it has crystal blue eyes in it too. So there's all those. In fact, even in the time of Nefertiti's bust, that there's been a lot of controversy over, which has of course been proven to be ancient. She only has one eye left in her, and this is a bust that was used so she didn't have to go around and pose for everybody. They agreed upon this as being a depiction that looks most like her, that they would like to have. And it has one eye left, but that one eye that's left has got one of those crystal blue eyes in it. So that's crazy. And of course that goes with the Sumerians and all kinds of different people, and does not go with these other people that are trying desperately to claim they knew Egypt existed, whenever it's well known the Congoids, that are basically all the people trying to claim that the ancient Egyptians would have possibly been black, they never knew Egypt existed. And they aren't even related to anybody that did know Egypt existed. So it really falls flat on its face, and it's become the joke of humanity here, and they won't quit. And when I first came into this, and I was demanded by Afrocentrics that I show this or that, or they would keep believing it, I showed a couple of videos worth, and those people just checked out. They didn't like, I don't want to see any more of this truth. So lo and behold, we ended up having them leave. But then other people showed up like they were brand new. And then I found out one of those guys that were brand new just changed his name. And that's that same old guy that's come limping in lame with his own lies again. So it's kind of disgusting that this type of thing keeps happening. But it does. And it shows you the truth and reality of things. And of course, they don't like their own history. So they would like to replace it with something else. And so they're trying to claim the ancient Egyptians were black. Well, what they don't realize is that this doesn't do anything for them. They were still a primordial, pre-Neolithic people all the way up until hundreds of years later, after the post-Roman period and stuff. In fact, some still are to this day, living in dung huts in a very primitive state. In fact, most of the non-colonized areas are. And while we spent trillions of dollars on trying to upgrade sub-Saharan Africa, they still are in that state to this day in a lot of the places that are what's called non-colonized. And I think it's crazy whenever the modern trend is kind of to call people colonizers like it's bad, whenever they love everything about it except for the fact that they weren't involved in what actually it shows the truth and reality of everything. And so they try to act mad about it whenever it's really showing the truth. So, again, that one article shows that the analysis revealed what are the ethnicities closest to ancient Egyptians. Well, analysis revealed that the ancient Egyptians had higher affinities with Near Eastern and European populations than modern Egyptians do, likely due to the 8% increase in the sub-Saharan African components found in modern Egyptians that apparently was never there in the past. And they don't like that idea either. So they don't really like anything about reality. And in doing so, they would rather just try to live a lie. And it's funny that they're all bad about this colonizer and hate white people, but yet they want to try to say they were around white people for a long time before. And of course, anthropology, all genetics and everything says no, that wasn't in effect in any way until a much more recent time. But they don't like that. they'd rather have a Caucasian history, and they self-expose every time they try to do something like this and claim they were there. I mean, Egyptologist 7 has done a lot on this guy, that King's monologue, and I did an hour and a half video, and really I just went off in left field, and I was only like 8 minutes into his video with an hour and a half of what I started depicting, and I realized, well, that's just about it, and I started recording the other ones, and then she came out with her first one against him, and just literally right off the bat, in a short amount of time, as she does, concisely, just ragdolled him all over the place. And I was like, well, that trumps me, and I'd like to really edit my video to where it's a whole lot smaller now and cut out a lot of this rigmarole that I go with. But I may release that here shortly to y'all and show you what I did in just the first 8 minutes. And I think that video that he did was at somewhere around an hour long, and so you can imagine with me yapping constantly how that would have been a series all against this guy. But she's put a series out against him, watching his videos and go, nope, that's a lie, here's the truth on it, whoop, nope, that's a lie, here's the truth on it, and just destroying his every attempt at trying to make claims. And of course, he's a recent Western Sub-Saharan, and they had nothing to do with even knowing that Egypt existed, so it's all so self-exposing. Regardless of that, and forget the Afrocentric thing. I mean, we're going to have to try to forget it eventually, but I think it'll be generations and generations before it's not the joke anymore, and it's not by anybody else's thing, it's by their own hands. But these blue-eyed Egyptians that I'm showing you pictures of again here, and there are a lot of these. You can just simply Google image search for blue-eyed Egyptian statues and then hit images up there, and it'll show you all of these images that were done in this crystal blue eyes, which is a marvel. You can imagine all of the Greek statues. If they had eyes like that in the Greek statues, they'd literally look like Medusa had turned somebody to stone, and there he is. And it's of the earliest dynasty's time, because there's a lot more going on with these people, and they knew a lot more and did a lot of advanced things that people still don't want to talk about to this day. In fact, I've done a recent video showing you that with this SAR radar penetration, they're showing that there's connections into, it looks like all of these pyramids are connected up under the ground, and then there's these pillars that are there and all this other parts that nobody even knew existed until this point. And I'd like it to be verified a little bit more before we try to go into it all, but it looks like you could go into some of these places and you might find things that are very revealing, and it would be something that would rival King Tut's finding of his tomb and all kinds of other things. By the way, King Tut's tomb shows there's multiple beds and all these other things in it. Well, that chair that they say was Tutankhamun's was actually Akhenaten's. In fact, they apparently took all of the artifacts that would have gone to Akhenaten and all these others and threw it into his. And of course, while they're doing this damnatio memory, trying to obliterate Akhenaten, having changed the religion basically of Egypt that had gone on for thousands of years, they just threw it all in his tomb, which apparently wasn't even a tomb for a pharaoh, but for someone else. And some people think there are still voids in there and things like that that are still evident. And of course, Egyptologists would like to go look into this a little bit more, but getting the current government to try to go along with it, they don't like that idea. And they seem to be really chugging along slowly, and every once in a while releasing something out which shows you something real neat, maybe driving tourism again, but they don't want to do something like POW and give you something real essential to your knowledge on ancient Egypt. In fact, they still try to repeat this idea of the modern Egyptians are the ancient Egyptians when genetics stepped up to the plate, and the first thing said out their mouth is like, no, they don't have as much a connection. But it really didn't change all the way through Egyptian society until post-Roman times, and then it changes And it's because of exactly the opposite of what Afrocentrics try to claim. And Arabic influx is in there about 16%, which drove their haplogroups and genetics to a different way, to where they no longer match the ancient Egyptians as much. And lo and behold, the people that match the ancient Egyptians the most in a modern time are Western Europeans. And again, that just makes sense when you find out King Tut's DNA was R1b, and if you look up the genetics of ancient Egypt and look at all the ones they've got the genetics out of, this shows you a lot of people that were ancient Anatolians and stuff. But one thing that's revealed in that genetic study is that the people that used to live in the Levant and the ancient Anatolian regions and all over there in the Near East and the edgings of Europe and so on had a migration period of time, and that would have hooked up to ancient Proto-Indo-Europeans and made the swath across, and ended up becoming far Western Europeans, which I'm sure a lot of you listening now have genetics that go back to that. But what it also shows is that many thousands of years before, a similar people to these, directly related, had come down through spreading agriculture. They're hooked up with the people of Göbekli Tepe, apparently, and the 20 or so Tastapeller sites they found so far, but also hooked up to the Natufians and the people that brought this advanced stoneware and things into Egypt in their very earliest dynasties that a lot of people make videos about, and they're like, we don't know where this comes from. But yeah, if you'll look into it, I've made videos about this showing you that ancient early Natufians already had these stone bowls and stoneware, and this is the stuff that's just left over. You can imagine that they kept it with them like heirlooms, like you've got your grandma's china, and would have kept it with them. In fact, this is not some pottery thing like China really is. This is stoneware, which if kept in good shape can last, well, basically forever. Anyhow, I'm going on far too long with this, but I wanted to show you again depictions of these people and show you what is coming out now versus what they've been trying to say for decades now, if not hundreds of years, and that the people of ancient Egypt were Caucasian type people. Now, E7 is shown in a few of her videos, these people that had the SLC genes and all this other, showing there were pale people in there. And I've shown you things that they knew about in the World War II, and preemptive to that, that there was a Nordic type of people, or some people that were related to the Nordics, which you think of as being the swath that came across from Western Europe. But this is way before, just like in that thing on King Tut I just showed, and that there was those and Mediterranean type Caucasians that had come together and formed ancient Egypt. In fact, something similar but slightly different happened in ancient Sumeria and in the Levant area, and then there was retrogression that happened across North Africa and so on too. But that doesn't mean that the people that were there before weren't Caucasians. In fact, Soy Keto was checked up by an Afrocentric saying, when did people look like, and I've got a video on this, when did people that look like Liz Taylor ever show up in North Africa or Egypt? And his answer was, well, they were there for at least 30,000, at least 60,000 years. And then he followed it up with, well, always. It's better to just look at it as being always. Anyhow, let me know what you think about this or want to talk about or whatever in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe if you haven't yet. And we'll get on to another video showing you some more things about ancient times and the way people were, and things that are not really looked at as much as that we should probably know about ancient people. Or that's really what my channel was originally about, and it's only deviated recently due to demands. Peace.